Hello, I'm Nicole Tomasi, the Marketing and Conference Manager here at Westchester Education Services, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion about integrating DEI principles into content for English language learners. Westchester Education Services provides a complete range of product development services for ed tech companies and education publishers, including content development, art and design, production, and project management for literacy, math, ELT, science, social studies, bilingual education, and translated products. We also create content for social emotional learning and reviews of your existing content to ensure it's culturally responsive and respectful of all learners. Please be aware that your microphones will remain muted during today's webinar, and I invite you to enter any questions that you have for the panelists in the Q&A window, and we'll get to as many as we can during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. Any questions that we don't answer live will be included in the Q&A transcript that will be sent with the webinar recording in the next few days. Now, let's meet our panelists. Beth O'Brien is a writer, editor, and reviewer. Her debut poetry pamphlet, Light Perception, focuses on the themes of disability and visual impairment, while her forthcoming poetry collection, I Left the Room Burning, explores trauma and its impact on memory. Pamela Tuck is a writer who credits her profession to her upbringing, surrounded by storytellers. Inspired by teachers, family, and friends, Pamela branched out from writing poetry in elementary school to short stories and plays. She is particularly interested in creating children's stories from picture books to middle grade readers. Walter Henderson is our moderator for today's discussion and Westchester Senior Supervising Editor of ELT. Prior to joining Westchester, he was a senior fellow for the U.S. Department of State, assigned to missions conducted by the U.S. Embassy in locations including Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Chile, and Ecuador to provide ELT training, curriculum, and materials development. Walter also provided content development services for several publishers, including National Geographic, Cambridge University Press, and Pearson Education. It is my pleasure to welcome Beth, Pam, and Walter.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's the afternoon for me over here in France and for Beth as well, who's in the UK. And Pamela is in the United States, and Nicole and pretty much everyone else. I think we have people from a little bit of everywhere. But thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm very excited to talk about the new project that we are currently working on, which is a series of graded readers for ELT students. And in this project, we have embraced really strongly the principles of DEI. Initially, it was an attempt for us to, well, our primary goal was to create ELT materials to support the learning of English. And in order to make it more reflective of the student population, we decided to embrace these principles that we are going to talk about today. So first of all, I'd just like to ask the question and answer it. What are graded readers? And basically the graded readers are easy reading books that the students use in class. In the ELT context, they are easy in the sense that the grammar and the vocabulary are a bit limited to reflect their actual English proficiency levels. Let me share my screen with you so that you can get a visual on what we are doing. I'll run through this very quickly. Okay, can everyone see this? Nod your heads. All right, great. So for the Hathaway graded readers, we have basically 4 different genres. We have classic fiction, realistic fiction, nonfiction, and we have graphic readers. And graphic readers are basically these readers that take the form of a comic book. And as you can see over to the right, we have 4 examples of the stories that we have just produced. Sailing the Storm, which was written by Beth, Crochet Captain, which was written by Pamela, and Changa and the Good Son, which was written by Tiffany Wren. And we have our nonfiction piece, which is on germs. As I mentioned before, the graded readers are written in simple English, and we use something called the CEFR, which is the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And here is an example of how simple those texts actually are. The grammar, as you can see in the sentences, is very, very simple. So are the adjectives, but it doesn't take away from the story itself. So this was our goal. Graded readers are not really new, but perhaps our approach is really different because we realized that the people who are the students who are studying English originate from all over the world. As you can see in the pictures, our ELT students look very different. They're very, very diverse in the United States and internationally. So what we wanted to do is capture that, to really embrace that and give the students some content to look at that actually reflected who they actually are. Okay. And this is what we tried to do in each of the titles. What we really wanted to do that was different with the graded readers was we wanted to use authors, writers who were as diverse as the characters that they could present in the stories as well. And in doing that, we reached out, we looked high and low, not for anything in particular, but to just really identify people who could bring a story from their own perspectives to us. And in doing that, we saw that each person is an individual and each person has a different perspective to actually share. And in doing this as well, one way that we approached it was to not strictly rely on professionals who have been experienced in writing ELT content, but really to look for writers who are experienced writers who would be willing to explore this new field and work with professional editors to provide the content that we were looking for. So that has been our approach. And in doing this as well, we were able to marry these new writers with experienced ELT content developers, with illustrators and designers from all over the world. And you'll see a bit of this in what we're about to show you. The first story here is our graphic reader, which is the comic book form. And as I mentioned, Beth is the writer of this. And she had the privilege of working with Jaime Rivera, who is one of our illustrators who is actually from Mexico. He could not be here today, and he didn't feel comfortable speaking English. Actually, his English skills are pretty limited, but he did provide a video clip for you to watch where he demonstrates his work and how he collaborated with Beth to bring the characters to the page. So I think I have to stop sharing my screen so that Nicole can pull up Jaime's video and you can watch it and listen to what he has to say. Here we are.
¿Qué tal? Yo soy Jaime Rivera, ilustrador de Sailing the Storm, y a continuación les voy a mostrar parte del proceso de cómo se fueron realizando los personajes de la historia. Aquí tenemos a Emma. Según las características que nos dictó la autora, se mostraron varias propuestas para ver cuál era de su agrado. Y acá tenemos a Dan, que es el amigo de Emma. Inicialmente fue de tez blanca y cabello pelirrojo, para que posteriormente se cambiara a una tez más oscura, moreno, y cabello negro, el cual ya lo vimos en la historia final. Acá tenemos a Lizzie, 3 propuestas de Lizzie. Para el papá de Emma hubo 2 propuestas, el cual eligieron esta. Después se procedió a borrarle el bigote, quitamos el bigote y ya quedó la propuesta final. Tenemos a Maggie, que es a la persona que rescatan durante la carrera. También se modificó el tono de piel Acá tenemos a su perrito. A la profesora de los niños, que bueno, al final de cuentas no quedó ninguna de esas opciones. También a continuación se mostrará cuál fue la final. Y bueno, esta es la página donde quedaron la mayoría de los personajes ya finales. Los que encontramos, tenemos aquí el antes y el final que encontramos en la historia. Tenemos a Emma, la versión final de Dan. A decir verdad, esta fue la primera vez que hice un cómic para niños. Y pues se me hizo un proceso muy divertido, ya que la historia fue divertida y emocionante porque tiene acción. Y pues bien, ahorita ya estamos preparados para la próxima historia, que comenzaremos tal vez en unas semanas. Y espero que también sea de su agrado. Y pues aquí estamos al pendiente y continuando trabajando muy duro. Saludos.
What was interesting about working with Jaime is marrying Jaime with Beth, because he was able to, they were somehow able to communicate very, very well together to take her ideas, her visualization, if you will, and transform that into the content of her book. It wasn't an easy process because Jaime doesn't speak English, but still they were able to work together to produce this content. And in doing so, we learned, I'm going to let Beth talk about it, but in doing so, we were able to learn a lot about what our ideas are for people who are visually impaired. We went through many different sketches because we do like to have the illustrators, we like to give them freedom to express their viewpoints. But as we all know, our visions of things are not always correct, they're not always accurate. And it was great for Beth to work with Jaime to actually correct those things or present a more proper representation. I'll let Beth speak to this before I go on and on and on. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Walter. Thank you. Yeah, so like Walter just said, working with Jaime was really cool to see all of the various sketches, and very, very interesting to see how what I'd written on paper was translated into an image. And part of the reason this project integrating the DEI aspects to these graded readers is so important is because a lot of the depictions initially of the characters with disabilities, so Emma being visually impaired and Lizzie being blind, was that a lot of the issues that currently exist with representations were sort of leaned on initially because that was our only known way of representing them. So Lizzie initially wore sunglasses, and I asked Jaime to change that because it's actually not a very representative way of showing someone who is blind. It's easy because we associate those things of someone's wearing sunglasses inside, we would assume because culture has taught us that, but actually I don't know anyone of my blind friends who use sunglasses on a daily basis. So it was those sort of things. I think Lizzie was then drawn with her eyes shut in most of the images, but I also asked that to be changed in the end. So I think it was a really interesting process to see how you go about representing these things fairly and accurately. And part of this was because Westchester was so enthusiastic about hearing our voices as writers and allowing that dialogue between illustrator and writer, because we each had our own perspective, and the end product is like an amalgamation of everyone's ideas rather than just one person's viewpoint. And it was really exciting to see it develop and change, and I think allowing that was what made it really work. And personally, just as a writer, this project is so exciting because disability representation in literature is my bugbear, because like it's so infrequently done in a positive way. And what I wanted to do with this story was to have a story that would be engaging and exciting and bright and colorful, and for it to feature characters with a disability that which the story didn't necessarily rely on for its whole entire plot. And I think that's why the title of this talk, integrating these aspects into literature, is what's important, because it isn't like whack you around the head with it, make it really obvious, a person with a disability, and the whole story has to be about how they struggle in the world and how they're so brave and courageous. It doesn't need to be about that. It can just be a story that anybody can enjoy reading. So it's a kid who has a disability might see themselves within that story, or know somebody who may have those same characteristics, but also an able-bodied child will just see that representation and not think someone with a disability is always going to be sad, or always needs to be cured at the end of a fairy tale, or needs to be helped or rescued. So I think, yeah, I just loved getting on board with working with loads of different people this is my first graded reader. I'm normally a poet, so this was all very new to me. But I had a lot of fun, and I think Westchester has such a positive outlook on how to really integrate these effectively. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Beth. Let me just show you guys before we move on to Pamela, just a couple of pages from this graded reader, so you can see some of the images here. Okay. I got so many things on the window here. Can you all see that? Nod your heads. Okay, so this is what we were speaking about. So here are 2 pages taken from the reader about Emma, who goes on this sailing adventure. And Emma is this character right here, who is visually impaired. And this is Lizzie. Here you can see on the right-hand side a representation of those characters in the story. Okay. Now we will talk about Crochet Captain, which is a very, very interesting story, just as powerful, written by Pamela Tuck. And I will let Pamela fill us in and talk to us about this story as well. Let's see here.
Hello, and thank you so much, Walter. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, Crochet Captain was actually inspired by a true family story. I'm the mother of 11 children, so I have a lot of stories floating around my household. But one of my sons actually was in middle school, and he was dared by a friend to join the crochet club. And so he did it intentionally. He joined the crochet club, and he learned how to crochet a little bit, but he was such a clown and such a leader, and he wanted to go around and help others get started on their projects. And so the teacher actually named him the Crochet Captain. So that's where the idea came from. I derived it from my son. And what I really enjoyed about working with Walter on this project was I wanted to show this character and just branch out from our own experiences with the story, being that I'm also a widowed mother of 11 children. And I wanted to show my character in a place of loss. But what I enjoy about working with Walter and Westchester, like Beth was saying, is that they're so dedicated to representing or allowing writers to represent the experiences that they've gone through. And so when I originally shared the story with Walter, the story has a little humor in it. And like Beth was saying, even though my character experienced loss, and also in the story, he experienced moving from his community, started a new school, many things that a lot of children around that age may have experienced, maybe not all the things in one character, but children have experienced leaving other schools, losing their friends. Some may be raised in single households, and some may have lost a parent or a loved one. And so all of those elements, I wanted to kind of share and branch branch my character out into those different areas. And one other thing that I wanted to include was a student who had, a reading disability, someone that needed help reading. And so that's a lot of different things going on with one character. But I really enjoyed working with Walter because as I shared the story with him and Westchester, they allowed me to grow as a writer and expanding my character beyond my own dreams and my own visions. And that I think Walter suggested, well, instead of letting the character lose the father, how do you feel about letting the character lose the mother and have the father raise the child? And I was on board with that because, that's not something that I find commonly represented, but it's reality for a lot of children, so I wanted to do that. And it actually expounded my vision and the diversity that we are seeking and the diversity that we are trying to expose other children to. So in telling the story, I was able to not focus so much on the sadness in Ronnie's life, but also just touch on it in a way that people are aware and can relate. Characters, diverse stories are not just words on a page. Diverse stories represent breathing and living people that hopefully the readers can identify with and, evoke emotions for and sympathize with, so that they can be more sympathetic and understanding of people who are like them or who may not be like them. So I really appreciate this opportunity in working with Walter and showing a character who, based on his reading challenge, he mistaken, a crochet club for a croquet club. And it was just a lot of humor in it, but not dwelling on the loss and the sadness that this character felt. And I'm so happy that he does have a happy ending. And but working with Westchester has really helped me, even though I was a writer of children's books before I took this project on. But everything, you're always learning, and that's what I like about Westchester is that we are helping learners learn, but as being writers, we're learning ourselves how to include diversity in our works and in our writings. And I'm just looking forward to, the next project and just seeing it's Jaime, just seeing his video and how this was his first time doing a graphic, art design and how he's ready for the next project. So that's just proof of how powerful diversity can be for everyone, because it just breaks us out of our comfort zones, out of our norms, and allows us to embrace diversity.
Thank you, Pamela. I totally agree with you, of course. Let me show you a few images from Pamela's story, and I'd like to comment on a few things because Pamela actually worked with a different illustrator who's from Mexico as well. So it's interesting to see what they came up with. Let me show you some things in here. Let's see. Okay. Is that okay? Can you see these? Okay. This is a beautiful cover of the Crochet Captain. Okay. And here we can see a sketch of an illustration that didn't quite make it to the final pages. Because we, in terms of, not to get too deeply into it, but the illustrator came up with what was in his mind's eye of how the little boy would look, and the mother, who we can see, who is deceased, but we can see the mother here on the left-hand side. But we had several discussions about what an African-American little boy might look like if he were raised by a single father. We had an issue with the hair because he has a little afro there. And that eventually became what we see here on page 6 and 7. So we changed the way that Ronnie looked. We also did a lot of different things that are not always apparent. We looked at his complexion. Not everyone has the same skin color, for example. Lots of little details went into this with Pamela's collaboration, and I think we ended up with a really great piece of work. It's a very interesting story, one of my favorites as well. They're all my favorites. Okay. And here we can see another scene from that story there. Okay. And the next story that I wanted to tell you all about is the story of Cheng-Yi and the Good Son. This one was written by Tiffany Ren, who is a writer and an elementary school teacher. Tiffany Ren is Chinese American, and she approached us wanting to write when she heard about the project. And her main motivation was to write a story that presented something about her origins, her family's origins in China. And she expressed that growing up, she rarely came across that type of content in her school years, in the materials that she actually saw. So she brought a traditional Chinese tale, which has been retold, and it's called Cheng-Yi and the Good Son. Tiffany she worked with yet another illustrator from Mexico as well. This is a very talented woman, and you can see that the designs and the illustrations are all very, very different. And this is an example that you can see on the page. But Tiffany had a very precise, how should I put this? She had a very clear idea of how she wanted to see the characters represented. And she wanted to show diversity within the Chinese population as well. So we did some sketches of the village people, for example, with different facial features and things like that. And you can see here that the character on the left has blue eyes, which is not something that stereotypically we would sort of envision someone of Asian descent having. But she wanted this Cheng-Yi to come from a certain region. I think it's a northwestern part of China. So it was really important for her to have those images reflect something beyond what we would have originally imagined. So you can see this right here. Here are the characters here. There's another image from the screen. Okay, and let me go back here, and I'm going to show you again the title for our nonfiction piece, which is called Germs. And this is written by Deborah Manier. Deborah Manier is another talented writer. She's actually a professor of ELT in the United States at a university, Tennessee State University. She couldn't be here today because she's actually in class right now. But she did send along a little video clip to talk about her work on the nonfiction piece. Nicole, could you share that with us, that video, if you don't mind?
I've been teaching English as a second language for over 25 years at the community college level. However, I started out as a K through 12 foreign language teacher. So when Walter approached me about the Hathaway Graded Readers Project, I was excited to get back to my elementary school roots. I feel that it's important for children to have access to true and accurate information that's age appropriate and written in easy to understand language. That has never been more true than during this global pandemic. My mother survived polio during the epidemics of the 1950s. She always said that the experience was less frightening for her once the disease had been explained to her in simple terms. As I was writing this piece, I thought of conversations I had had with my own grandchildren about how viruses work and how they could protect themselves and others from getting sick. These conversations inspired me to make the same information accessible to young, beginning English language learners. Hathaway has created comprehensive supplemental materials to go with each story, giving inexperienced teachers a complete package, so to speak, while more experienced teachers can pick and choose which Hathaway exercises to use in conjunction with their own materials. Each book is superbly illustrated with engaging, age-appropriate content. I hope you enjoy working with these texts as much as I enjoyed helping to create them.
Thank you. Okay. So yes, this has been a great project. As I mentioned before, it's an ongoing project. We are covering grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, and hopefully others. And in all of these, I think that as we move along, we will get much, much better at what we do. I think we have a strong grip on the ELT content, but what we're doing in terms of DEI initiatives is really a process that is growing every single day. We're learning more and more about what we are trying to do. And I think we will find more interesting writers to contribute to the project that we have, as well as illustrators and designers. I think we can take a few questions right now, if that's okay with everyone. Is that okay, Nicole? Can we?
Absolutely. And in fact, we do have a few questions here from the attendees. I'm going to start with this one that we received. It asks if you can explain a little bit more about the editing process in terms of working with the author's text to level it in line with the CEFR.
That's a very good question, because for anyone who is an ELT professional, we're really familiar with the content and what that should look like in terms of leveling. However, if you've written for ELL or grade 3 and domestically or what have you, you know that the language levels are quite different. So it has been a challenge in a way to work with writers who haven't written for this particular population before, but it's still been, what we wanted to do was to include them in this process. There's no reason why a person who hasn't been an ELT writer before cannot become one. So at the beginning of the project, we explain what the Common European Framework is, how we use that to level the text. Pamela and I had some discussions about that. I think she first gave us a story that was really, really beautiful, but I felt it was a little bit too young. So we had a lot of back and forth on how to take a story and how to make it simple, but not to simplify it in terms of age level. It has nothing to do with that. I mean, the stories have to be age appropriate and interesting. It's just that the language is simplified so that they can use the language that they actually know and then learn and improve their English language skills. So in terms of the editing process, we have the writers work with experienced ELT editors who take their text and help them level it appropriately. Does that answer the question? Am I missing part of it? Did I get everything there, Nicole?
I think we did get it, but I would also be curious to know, what the experience was like for Beth and Pamela to work with the editor during that leveling process. Could either of you speak to that?
Pamela?
Sure, I was waiting for Beth. I wasn't sure if she was going to start. But yeah, it was a very enlightening experience for me. Just like Walter mentioned, the first story that I presented to him was a little younger. It was like a younger character and the story for the level that he wanted. And it was enlightening for me because, like he mentioned, readers who are learning language learning readers, the concepts they're familiar with, it's just a lower level of vocabulary. And so being able to relate that and coming up with a story that could appeal to students who were very well versed in maybe experiences, but just needed help learning the language, enabled me to see and develop a new lens of how to approach this type of project. So that was very enlightening, because a lot of times as writers, I'll speak for myself, I just write a story and not think about, I think about the targeted audience. But if you think about it, a lot of times books are arranged like 4 to or 2 to 4 or 4 to 8 or 8 to 12, and that's a broad range. And here again, it goes right back to diversity, because in that range of 8 to 12, you have so many different levels of experience. You have so many different levels of abilities. And then but we're looking at it through a lens of people who know the English language. So to break that down to, all right, we have an age range from 8 to 12, but now you're dealing with people who understand what 8 to 12-year-olds may understand, but their language vocabulary may be on the level of like a kindergartner or a first grader. And so it's just a new world that I am excited to be a part of. And I'm ready to learn more, with Walter and Westchester, because just offering these materials and this opportunity to children to enlighten them and engage them and entertain them and help them learn, become better readers. That's our targeted goal and what we're excited to be a part of. And so my experience was fascinating, and I'm looking forward to doing more.
Thank you, Pamela. And Beth, I think yours was a bit of a challenge, because Beth originally didn't want to, well, it's not that you didn't want to, but writing for the comic book genre it has its own challenges. It has a lot of challenges. So not only does the language have to be simple, but it's very, very limited, because you can only put a little piece into these little panels and things like that. So I want to thank you yet again for taking on that challenge. But can you speak a little bit to that? How was it a horrible process for you or not?
It genuinely wasn't a horrible process. Sorry if you can hear my neighbors. It was a real learning curve for me, and it ended up in my head feeling quite ironic, because graphic readers are so visual. So actually a lot of the writing I did were the illustration descriptions. So it just meant I had to have a storyboarded, almost film-like notion of how this story needed to play out, what needed to be able to be represented on the page for someone who is a reluctant reader or is struggling with grasping these words, to maybe be able to guess what the words could say or could mean from what the pictures showed. I worked with an editor called Bertha, and she was incredible, because she gave me very specific but very few rules I needed to follow. And that really helped just give me a framework to how much dialogue I should be aiming for per panel, how often I should have a comment box that provided setting rather than dialogue. And then at the end, through a conversation with Walter, we added in more sound effect noises and those sort of things to bring it a bit more to life. So I think it's different, because I didn't need to worry about my language difficulty as much in the illustration descriptions, because they were going to Jaime for him to draw. But what was the challenge was figuring out what dialogue was necessary or needed, how it complemented what I was describing the pictures to be, but also inform it so that so you still needed the dialogue, but you had a chance of working it out. So it was a completely new thing for me. But it wasn't horrible. I think Walter, I think he feels more sorry for me than he should, because I had a lot of fun and I really enjoyed imagining what the illustration should look like and seeing those drawn out. So but a bit different, because I had a few less restrictions in my illustration descriptions.
Thank you very much. Should we take some more questions, Nicole?
Sure, let's do that. The next question I have here, it says, I work for a publisher that also develops graded readers, but they are often adaptations of classic literature. How would you advise going about adapting or developing graded readers with a diversity, equity, inclusion lens when you need to deal with adapting classics that are often racist in nature?
Should I take that one? What we've done with this, we really have strongly embraced what we have a genre, it's called the classic fiction, but really what we've started to do is create fractured fiction tales, so a reworking of a classic piece. For example, the Chain E story that you saw images from, That is a very traditional tale. It was originally about a man. Chang Yi was actually the wife, but this is something that we are strongly embracing. We have something coming up about, it's a retelling of the Cinderella tale told from the perspective of a young boy who's actually a page in the story. We're doing that because what we're trying to do is find content that is new in a way, fresh. So that is our approach to that. And by using diverse writers and illustrators, we hope that everyone coming together can come up with a formula that will make it even more interesting and more exciting for the students. Let's see, do we have another question here? Do you want to read it, Nicole, or should I?
Go ahead and read it. Sure. Thank you. The question is, how would you grade the readers according to which kind of benchmark? It's hard to measure the reading levels of your readers that you don't know. Would you still employ recommended school grades or ages?
Yes, that's a good editorial question. It is really, really hard, but you have to start somewhere. We've started off with grade 3. This grade 3 is restricted to CEFR A1. We have a team of experienced editors who actually make sure that the content is at that particular level. But in producing these, we do anticipate having to adapt these, having to further adapt them to specific clients. And we're interested in doing that and willing to do that as well, because it's a very, very difficult thing to always get a grasp on. I mean, we have students from all over the world, and even ESL students in the United States have completely different levels. So we do a range, if you will. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Walter.
Thank
The other question that's here, I guess this might be looking a little bit towards the future, is are there any nonfiction books in the subject of history? Is that something you're looking to do down the line?
We're looking to do everything. So yes, yes. Nonfiction is a very popular category with teachers around the world. And what we want to do is explore as many different things as we possibly can. So, you know, the Germs title was a reach, and we really liked what we actually had produced. And we will be doing, our next one is on hair, for example. And what we'd like to do is explore some historical topics as well. So yes, that's a definite yes.
Okay, and we actually had received a couple of questions in the run-up to the webinar. So if we haven't already tackled those, I'd like to look at those now if we could.
Okay.
The first one here is, I know we touched on it a little bit. The questioner was wondering about the rubric that was used and whether it was created specifically for this project, and also whether it is elevating the work of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and English language learners in the community.
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. When we, as I alluded to before, when we approached this project, it was with a notion of working on this, and it has been a learning process. So Westchester has been doing a lot of work in this particular area, where we are developing rubrics for specific projects. And for this one, we did not use one initially, but we did use we did use a rubric actually to analyze the stories, the text that we had created. And we just did this for the past week. And what was interesting about this is that with each graded reader, we have workbooks that focus on grammar, vocabulary, and there's some extended activities as well. I felt that we captured what was needed for in terms of diversity and inclusion for the graded reading, for the stories that you see here. But for the workbooks, I wasn't really sure. So we took that rubric and we ran the workbooks through them to see if what we were trying to do in the graded readers was repeated. And we found that it was when it pulled from the stories itself, but we still fell back to the same sort of tendencies, if you will. It was quite unintentional. So this is something that I realize is very important. Initially, I was like, I don't want to design a rubric and run it through this and that because I didn't want it to become too formulaic. But it is really, really important to use those, in particular when you can go back and analyze the work that you've done and see if you sort of hit those marks.
Okay, thank you, Walter. We do have a couple of more questions. We have one that was submitted from one of the attendees, and they ask, how do you balance colloquial, accessible language and patterns with the more formal English that's taught in school?
How do we balance it? It's so far it has really depended on the titles, on the writers themselves. Again, our intention is for each story that is created for them to be fully adapted. Right now, we are running, I didn't mention this before, but the titles themselves are in British English, standard British English, and also in American English, if you will. So we have editors and writers on both sides. Beth is from the UK. And what we do is Beth will write her way, and then we'll have someone convert it to American English. And that's what we're doing on each title and also on the ancillaries as well. What I'd like to see is more colloquial language used so that students can identify with that. And we don't try to explain everything in the stories themselves, but in the teacher support material, we use those to really explore the vocabulary and to really explore, different themes that come up and to fill in those gaps that might be in the stories or what have you. So if we use colloquial language, we don't try to explain it in the story, but we use our ancillaries, our workbooks to address that and give students additional exercises and things of that nature. So that's our current approach.
Okay, great. And this is the final question that we have right now. The question is, what venues for searching for educational writing talent and expertise would you recommend when looking to hire children's authors of color and, in general, authors who are equipped to voice diverse experiences and perspectives?
That's a pack, and perhaps Pamela and Beth can speak to that as well. How did I find you? How did I find you guys? I'll just say that for me, we have a wonderful human resources director who is constantly looking out and looking in as well. And for me, looking in has been really important because a lot of times what we're looking for is right in front of us. It's just a matter of opening your eyes and things. I think you can say, I want a list of such and such and this and that, but a lot of times these people are working around you. I use our tools that we have a wonderful system where we are looking for writers and editors and constantly bringing them in. And I make it a daily sort of habit to go through that and look at different individuals, regardless of race and background. I think we're all sort of different anyway. Everybody has something different to bring to the table. And I use sources such as LinkedIn, if you will. I'm always exploring and Googling and looking for different organizations too, who support writers of colors and people from different countries as well. So it's an ongoing process, if you will. And it's a fun thing as well because it's interesting to discover new people. Pamela and Beth, do you have anything to add to that? I don't want to talk so much. It's our last question.
Yeah, sure. Well, from my personal experience, as I mentioned, I was a children's book author before teaming up with Westchester. But in my search and in my quest, I do traditional publishing, but I was also looking for something to freelance, a freelance opportunity. So I had attended the Highlights Foundation. They actually had a workshop on writing for the educational market. And so that is a way I'm thinking that people who are looking for writers could Google writing for the educational markets, because there are a lot of websites and blogs and panels who are actually posting work and also posting opportunities for people who are looking to work for educational market or work for hire. And so after attending the workshop at the Highlights Foundation, I was equipped with resources from that workshop, but I also did research on my own. And that's how I stumbled across Westchester. And they actually had a talent pool. And so I just, filled out the information, listed my profile, and with the understanding that they didn't have a project for me at that time. But, as projects would arise, they had my information to, select me for whatever projects they thought that my skills matched up with. And I think that's how Walter discovered me. I was already in the talent pool at Westchester, and there was a prime example of being right under your nose there. But there are websites, there are blogs, that actually target, writing for the educational market. So if you want to visit some of those sites, sometimes you can link what you're looking for. As me as a writer, I was looking to work, but they also have opportunities for people who are looking for writers to post, what they're looking for as well for hire.
Right. Thank you. And Beth, your story and mine is quite interesting. I was in the UK at a conference, and I stumbled across a beautiful book of poetry about a woman with a disability, and I just said, well, that would be a great story, but at the time we hadn't started the Graded Readers, so I held on to that, and I think that's how one of the ways that I got to know Beth. So I just reached out to her, and she was really interested. No.
Yeah, that's pretty much the size of it. Like, it was, I guess, like Walter's memory that you read that one Christmas, and then like a year and a half later, I
Yes.
get like an email being like, "Do you want to do this?" So I think it's just like identifying things and like remembering that they're there, because I guess like similarly like with Pamela's story, like she applied, it wasn't right then, but actually down the line it became a thing. So I think it's just I guess it's persistence, but also like Pamela said, writers always want work. So like, just find us. We'll want to do it, I promise.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Nicole, do we have any other questions?
We actually don't, but it lines up pretty well because we're about a minute out from concluding the session. So thank you, to all the attendees for listening and for submitting such excellent questions for our panelists to answer. And I would also like to extend my thanks to Walter, Beth, and Pam, as well as to Jaime and Deborah for sharing their perspectives during today's discussion. I just want to let all of our attendees know that we will be emailing out the webinar recording in the next few days, along with the question and answer transcript, so that you can refer back to this information or perhaps share it with some of your colleagues who weren't able to join us today. And if you'd like to learn more about our product development services, please visit our website, which is westchestereducationservices.com. And if you have any comments or questions regarding today's webinar, you can email me directly at nicole.tomassi, that's TOMASSI, at westchestereducationservices.com. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you could please take a moment after the webinar concludes, there'll be a short survey that will appear in your window. And if you could complete that, it provides us some very useful feedback in determining future content to bring to you. So with that, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.